Today we are going to take a look at Mars's upcoming conjunction with Saturn in the sign of Pisces. One of the reasons that this isn't happening, let's take a look at the timeline first. You're going to give it about a 3-degree range within which the significations really start to show up. So that dates back for us to right around Saturday, April 6th. Now, the two planets then continue to come together slowly. Here, Tuesday, April 9th, you can see they're just about a degree apart. Tomorrow, Wednesday, April 10th, they come together. And then by Thursday, April 11th, they're separating, give it about 3 degrees of separation, and you get Monday, April 15th as the kind of total separation from Saturn within the 3-degree engagement range that ancient astrologers used. So put that at about a week from right now. But the most intense part of the transit you are likely to feel this week, today, tomorrow, Thursday, in the wake of the solar eclipse. Let's back up and remind ourselves of what just happened yesterday. So here we have the solar eclipse on Monday, April 8th, and that's happening as Mars is coming to within about a degree of Saturn as the ruler of the North Node, the ruler of Venus, the ruler of Mercury retrograde, and the ruler of the solar eclipse in Aries. So there's a lot of Mars. It's a lot of Mars. Now, what we have to ask ourselves is, what does it mean? What does it mean that Mars is conjoining Saturn as the ruler of the eclipse, and in doing so in the watery, double-bodied, feminine sign of Pisces, the home sign of Jupiter, the exaltation of Venus? All these little details add up. So now that we've taken a look at the real-time clock, I'll pull it back up in a second to show you one other little detail, but I want to start by just reminding us, just a simple basic lesson in astrology. Mars and Saturn in Pisces, you have different levels at which you can interpret that pairing. There's always, okay, Mars-Saturn. What do Mars-Saturn do together in general? On an archetypal level, what is a Mars-Saturn combination like, regardless of if it's a conjunction, a trine, a sextile, a square? Regardless of what type of aspect is connecting Mars to Saturn, what do Mars and Saturn do when they get together? And that is always the most basic level at which we need to start an understanding of a planetary aspect. If you can do that, and you develop that skill as even just a hobby consumer of astrology, you're going to get things right in terms of your ability to accurately assess or interpret the conditions of the planets. You're going to get things right like at least 50 to 60% of the time, because you're going to nail the basic archetypal combination. Then to get a little bit more accurate, you have to start including more and more details. For example, what does it mean that they're conjoined rather than opposed? What does it mean that they're in the sign of Jupiter, a feminine water sign, and the exaltation of Venus? And where are those planets in the sky right now? How are they configured to those planets in the sky right now? And oh, by the way, did you notice that Mars is conjoining Saturn as Mars is the ruler of a solar eclipse that just happened? So all of this, there's a whole world. I mean, literally, it's like a tapestry just filled with so much information. The question becomes, how do we access that information in a way that doesn't overwhelm us, that can make sense out of the sky and make sense of a Mars-Saturn conjunction without becoming just gobbledygook? Like just it starts all of a sudden we put it all together. What does it mean? All of these things, you go, you're gonna be a healer, you're gonna go through a transformational crisis. So we have to try, which all may be true, but we have to try to put the details together in a way that actually delineates the archetype more specifically, so that you go from looking at a big tapestry full of images to more specific combinations of images. And then the themes and images that you come up with, because of the refinement of all of those details, lead to a more accurate ability to describe or predict. And of course, in hindsight, it helps us to assess those details so we can understand what we're looking at in reflection. So at any level of looking at transits, past, present, or future, require that we gradually learn how to add more things in. I say gradually because if you try to do it too quickly, most of the time we get overwhelmed. And then it's gobbledygook, and then we're all just, shamans floating around the ethers. All right, so number one thing we'll start with is general Mars-Saturn significations. Mars is the gas pedal. Saturn is the brakes. So when you get the two of them together, in any combination, you're working with a refinement of the gas and brake pedals together. Obviously, the best thing you can learn is how to have a cooperative relationship between, acceleration, will, force, drive, speed, exertion, power, and restraint, discipline, maturity, discernment, all factors that Saturn can bring when combined with Mars. You also have to deal with the limiting factors of Saturn, like being overly conservative or afraid or restrictive or doubtful or controlling. And Mars is less risk averse. And so, Mars is going to take those risks and sometimes has to tell Saturn to chill out a little bit. So Saturn can inflect itself upon Mars and offer Mars a container that's mature and wise, like a discipline in the life of an athlete, or discipline in the life of a martial artist or something like that. These are Mars Saturn ideas that come to my mind right away. But there's also the sense in which Mars inflects itself upon Saturn and says, don't be so controlling, don't be so conservative. Your conservative energy is acting as a prohibition or a block or a something that's trying to limit or restrict movement, and so you have to chill out a little bit. So it can also be like an unstoppable force meets an immovable object kind of situation. The gas and the brake pedal, the unstoppable force and the immovable object. The two coming together are often required when we have to go through tests that require a lot of effort and work and maturity and focus, and they test our mettle, and we might have to work through conflicts or frustrations and be persevering, but we also have to do so with great maturity and discernment. We have to do so with great focus and discipline. It's doing hard things and doing them well. Mars Saturn can also come up when things explode or break.
What a close-minded AI.
Whether it's pulling a muscle or
like, it's just math.
breaking an arm or something.
It's just math and observation. That's all it is.
I hate to even utter those things because I don't like putting it out there, but it's like there's legitimately a way in which limits, boundaries, barriers are broken through, and sometimes forcefully and destructively. With there can be kind of a menacing quality to Mars and Saturn, but you also have this idea of how do you carefully build and construct something, where there's labor and effort, Mars significations, but there is a kind of restraint and methodical way in which you go about doing something. And oftentimes those things are rewarded when the two planets come together, whereas being overly restrictive or overly forceful end up meeting with some kind of karmic consequence. So the two planets are also very good under pressure. Like I heard a colleague of mine say this once, and I never forgot it because I really agreed with it, which is that if you're under a deadline and you have to get something done really quickly and it's a high pressure situation, Mars Saturn's pretty good for that. Mars Saturn is also quite frequently associated with the significations of military, armed conflict, and strict and sort of zealous warlike dogmas, like the kinds of things that people will die for, the kinds of things that people will fight for with a kind of what do I want to say, like a militaristic or fanatical religious or political points of view, and also just like the healthy version of having principles that you stick to and fight for or act on behalf of. So these are all things that can come up. Now, when the two planets are conjoined, the archetypal qualities are blended, and you often see the conjunction of two planets blends their significations together. Rather than each planet having a dialogue, it is as though the two are being mutually inflected upon one another, and it's as though a third thing emerges. A smars. A Mars-Saturn. So we get this kind of blending of the two archetypes. So these are the kinds of things that are coming this week. Now, when you pair that alongside of the fact that Mars was the ruler of the solar eclipse and a large stellium in Aries, that's when it gets really a lot more specific. And that layer of information, despite all the other levels or layers available to us, is probably the most important. Um, Aries is a tropical sign. It's a fire sign. It's a masculine sign. It's where the sun and Mars are exalted. Aries acts with tremendous force and vigor and speed and intensity on behalf of a few things. You know, the blazing of a trail, or the staking of a claim, or the choosing of a path with great determination and kind of a heroic kind of quest motif. Now, there's also Aries is also often concerned with individuation, the need to feel and be strong in one's self. So these are the qualities of young life grabbing a hold and becoming individuated. Like the cutting of the umbilical cord isn't like a kind of an Aries image. The baby becomes independent, even if it's just still an infant and totally dependent upon its mother. We're always dependent upon things. But Aries is a sign with the rulers of Mars and the exaltation of the sun that often emphasize the path, the destiny, the blazing of trails, the pioneering, the entrepreneur, the risk taker, the soldier, the warrior, often the hero, and the part of us that is always seeking to self-actualize. So all of this energy, including a Mercury retrograde in Aries, has us looking at a lot of these themes right now. And a solar eclipse is like a very potent version of a new moon, in that it is here to start something new, plant a seed. Tropical signs, the 4 signs associated with the equinoxes and solstices, that would be Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn. They are all called tropical, from the word tropos, which means to turn, like a turning point. Aries is the turning point of the solar year from the zodiacal standpoint in the northern hemisphere, where the symbolic language comes from, in which the light takes over from the darkness for the rest of for this half of the year. It's like now we're on the light half. That's the yang half. That's the half that is associated with the metaphysical principles of light, which aren't any better or worse than yin or darkness or the feminine. There's a story that plays out archetypally between opposites. The whole language of the zodiac is rooted in this story. So in Aries, we have a turning point toward light. What is light? Well, light can be so many different things. It can be the will, it can be the individuality, it can be all of these things we've been mentioning have a strong association with yang, to become separate, apart, individual, to separate rather than join in relationship, to stand out and apart as opposed to commingle and relate. Those are yang principles. And they're within all of us. It doesn't matter about gender. Gender, sex categories are completely fluid. These categories we're talking about are metaphysical. So the principle of an Aries eclipse is a solar eclipse is about tremendous energy behind this impetus to individuate, to start new things, to strike out with bold, assertive, aggressive actions. It's competitive at times, honestly. But it also says, I'm going to face fears with courage. I'm going to act decisively on behalf of new impulses and desires that are forming. I found out recently, I was watching this video I found where they were talking about the etymology of words, and desire, the word desire came from desidere, which means something like from the stars, or so anyway, I can't remember. I think maybe I shared that already with you guys. I have zero memory at this point, I guess. But anyway, so yeah, desire comes from the stars. It comes from an ancient view that our desires and whether or not they will be fulfilled rests in the power of the gods and the stars. Aries signals the beginning of new desires that are planted in the heart that we're going to act on, and they come as dramatic turning points with solar eclipses in Aries. Now, take all of that and let's now interpret the Mars-Saturn significations in the background that rule this eclipse. Right, so if this is a Marsy eclipse, a fiery, spring-like Aries Marsy eclipse, what is Mars doing? Mars is conjoining Saturn in Pisces, where we have things like the refinement of the will, prohibiting of the will, the maturing of the will. We have great, tremendous situations that could call for some kind of militaristic activity or response. Now, that could be just psychological, doesn't have to be literal warfare. But the call to arms psychically, the feeling that we have to work through some kind of prohibiting or limiting or frustrating factor as Saturn and Mars come together, that we have to deal with fears and constraints and doubts and various conservative elements that we have to try to push through, but also maybe do some compromising with. You see, so the everything we said about Saturn and Mars is a qualifying hurdle that we're having to sort of jump over, or it's a it's a ball of energy that we have to somehow sit and contemplate as this sort of Aryan new beginning tries to establish itself. So now, the other thing that's really important to look at here, this is all greatly amplified by the fact that Mars and Saturn, as they conjoin this week as the ruler of the eclipse, are in the domicile of Jupiter, that's Pisces, one of its 2 domiciles, and they are in the bound of Jupiter as well. What is Jupiter doing? Wody-dody. Jupiter's about to conjoin Uranus. Now we're cooking with fire, right? Because they are in the bound of Jupiter, they are acting on behalf of things that they believe in. They're acting on behalf of virtues, or they're acting on behalf of beliefs. That is for sure one of the potential significations. So this gives you a kind of holy war, Joan of Arc type of feeling behind this eclipse. You might be ready to go to battle or war.
Yo,
trying to start
what the
new,
fuck,
being
man?
faced with
AI has never
things
been
that
like
are
this
challenging
before,
your
I
beliefs,
swear to
or
God.
challenge you to act on behalf of them.
Telling you,
Or to stand
astrology,
strong
man.
in some kind of principled
The
conviction
Aries
about
coming
something
out in
that's happening
AI,
around you.
holy shit.
Jupiter is also about to conjoin Uranus in Taurus, which, by the way, has the signification of breakthrough and revolution behind it. Now, this is happening, of course, in Venus's sign, but Venus is in Mars's sign, and Mars is in Venus's exaltation. I suspect that behind all of this is the difficulty of trying to make important changes, start new things in the way that Aries likes to start. That we're dealing with principled conflicts that ideally we would like to resolve peacefully with other people.
Come on, man.
Is it possible? Is it not possible? We'll see. Another way of looking at this would be to say that when Mars and Saturn are acting together in Jupiter's term or bound and domicile, and Jupiter's about to conjoin Uranus, that this conflict, this challenge, this pressure cooker of Mars-Saturn this week behind the eclipse is fueling some kind of principled actions that are, they're behind an even larger and bigger impetus than just the solar eclipse in Aries, but the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction.
What the fuck is going on with
this
AI,
new thing
man?
we're trying to start is really the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in Taurus. And so let me just back that up a second, so in case it doesn't make sense. You could say, well, the sun in Aries is trying to start something new, and it's very Aries-like. That would be totally fair for a solar eclipse in Aries. But then you have to combine the ruler. Okay, well, it's trying to start something in an Aries-like way, but it's also dealing with the Mars and Saturn and Pisces kind of conflict or frustration or challenge that it has to work through. You can be very watery, emotional, rooted in things like your beliefs and ideals and visions. But when that Mars-Saturn conjunction is simultaneously in the bound and domicile of Jupiter, and Jupiter is in a rare conjunction with Uranus, then I think we can safely say that what's really happening here is we are having there are some very strong energies that are behind the impetus to revolutionize that Jupiter-Uranus represents. It's because it's all coming together in the next, 10 days, 12 days. Jupiter-Uranus likes to create sudden, tremendous breakthroughs. It is principled and defiant. But because Jupiter is principled, people always think of Jupiter as, it's just expansion. Jupiter was Zeus. Jupiter was the ruler of law and societal order and religion and institutions of higher learning. Jupiter is this kind of virtuous, the principle of like, a fair and just government, a fair and just legal system, human rights and dignity. Those are the best qualities of Jupiter. I'm not saying that we live up to those things, and certainly the institutions that are supposed to represent those things are often totally corrupt in our world. But as a planet, as a god, Jupiter represents the cohesion of our world and our cosmos as a well-ordered, beautiful, sort of symmetrical thing. Now, is that all there is? No, there's a reason that Jupiter's, underworld brother is Hades, right? And that's important. That's a really important dichotomy in ancient mythology and in ancient philosophy, right? That Hades and Zeus are like opposites. They occupy different worlds, the underworld and the overworld. Oh, it's nice and sunny and well ordered up here. Oh, in Hades, things are literally described as everything is upside down. Did you know that? So anyway, but Jupiter at its best, conjoining Uranus, the sort of Promethean principle, is about breakthroughs that are in the name of Venusian things like peace, beauty, rest, luxury, wealth, stability, ease. And Jupiter-Uranus is saying more of that. And I'm, it's a revolutionary and sort of defiant impulse with Jupiter and Uranus. Well, that's coming through at the same time that this solar eclipse in Aries, very Mars-like, very fired up about trying to strike forward in very strong, active, aggressive, assertive ways, while Saturn and Mars are together in Pisces, wrestling with intense and not so, like complex emotional territory, where we're entangled with other people in webs of love and respect, while there are probably things like very different values and beliefs that are conflicting as well. So you have this, although the Jupiter-Taurus or Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in Taurus looks very sort of like a peaceful, revolutionary situation. Like, oh, that looks really kind of nice. Yeah, at the same time, it's being fueled by some really intense and complicated-looking conflict at the moment. Now, I believe that will all resolve, or we're going to be moving into. I mean, this is our sort of phase one of the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. Let me just show you something that happens afterward. So if you take a look, if we move this forward a little bit to the actual Jupiter-Uranus conjunction on April 19th into the 20th, the Sun enters Taurus. Not long after that, Mercury stations direct and Venus enters Taurus. And then not long after that, we'll have eventually also Mercury entering Taurus. So like things do calm down. I mean, we get everything moving into a stable Earth sign. We also have this super lovely looking new moon. Let me show you this one. This is kind of nice. New moon in Taurus right around May 8th. Might be just a touch before that. Yeah, it's going to be like late May 7th. You can see that. There's Venus in Taurus, the new moon in Taurus, exalted new moon in Taurus. Jupiter and Uranus are just separating within 3 degrees. Mercury's direct. It's like it is, and Mars is in its own domicile by that point as well. My point is that like there are greener pastures, and I do believe that the revolution of Jupiter and Uranus is leading to, probably for many of us, will like legitimately lead to a stabler, more peaceful kind of situation, and maybe one that is, where we've stabilized and done some healing work in Venusian territories like relationships, art, sensuality, pleasure. But right now, we're in eclipse season, and as you can see, like the lay of the land is turbulent. This week especially with Mars and Saturn conjoining in Pisces, you have to remember the double-bodied water sign is. It reminds me of the Knight of Cups in the tarot. You have a kind of chivalrous, crusading, romantic, and very principled, and sometimes even fanatical and sort of crazy religious side to Pisces. A visionary and romantic quality to Pisces. And when Mars and Saturn are behind that with an Aries eclipse, it's like, ooh, there's very strong feelings at work here, and maybe some that are like almost fanatical. And then you're pairing that with the revolutionary impulse of Mars-Saturn being ruled so strongly by Jupiter, who's conjoining with Uranus. What we will do for the name of peace, for the name of prosperity. I mean, there are famous examples of Tauruses throughout history who have been ruthless, Adolf Hitler being one of them, right? And some people throughout history imagine a golden age, a golden era of peace and prosperity, but only for the right people, and like death to everyone else. So and I'm not saying that any of us are on that level of monstrosity, right? But we have to be careful of the shadows of what we're desiring and the lengths we're willing to go, and the bridges we might be willing to burn. I think there is something about this right now that says, like, just steady, like, just walk through this conflict with a principled but moderate. The revolution, can it come peacefully? Can it come because you have worked through a pressure cooker and not lost your cool, and worked to resolve conflicts and to harmonize? I just recently watched this movie. It was a movie about Bob Marley, and I think it was produced by some of his family members or something. I just thought, well, this kind of looks like a fun thing to watch. So I like Bob Marley. And I was impressed. I don't know. I'm not like a Bob Marley historian, and I'm not trying to, what's the word? Like, I'm not trying to make him into a saint or anything, but I was very impressed by some of the choices that he made around trying to be something of a political peacemaker in Jamaica. That was sort of the point of the movie. And there was like a lot of danger and violence involved in doing that. And he had this strong belief that music could bring people together and could heal things. And anyway, I was thinking, well, this is very appropriate that I'm watching this kind of musical reggae revolutionary around the time that Jupiter and Uranus are coming together in a Venus-ruled Earth sign. Makes a lot of sense. Anyway, so I think what we're dealing with is what we will do in the name of things that we find to be beautiful or stable or peaceful or luxurious. What will we do in the name of Venus, so to speak? And the look of things this week is like, we might do more than we should. Like, we might be there could be a little bit of craziness at work. So, and on the other hand, there's something about a very kind of like a mature management of desires and emotions that lead to careful mediation of conflicts or conflicting desires even within ourselves, that maybe finally allow us to really experience a powerful breakthrough by the time Jupiter and Uranus come through. Anyway, I've been just sort of rambling with these reflections. The last thing I'll say is the other really important factor behind this Mars-Saturn conjunction is right as they conjoin, look at what else happens. Let me take this back just a little bit. So we have Mars and Saturn coming together. You can see them at the bottom of the chart there. Right after they come together and separate by Thursday of this week, and I'll be doing a separate video on this one, Mercury goes through its cazimi at the heart of the sun. That resetting, that rebirthing of Mercury moving into the morning star position is really important. So I'm going to do a whole separate video on the Mercury cazimi this week because I've got a bunch of other things to say about it, and some specific significations I think go along with it. But one of them has to do with feeling empowered, but also being careful of the wise use of our will, and so we're going to talk about that anyway, with a little bit more care in a future video this week. So that comes through on Thursday, right after the ruler of the eclipse, Mars, is done with the conjunction to Saturn. So anyway, I hope that this was useful for you guys and interesting and prepares you with some fresh ways of thinking about the energies of the week. It's always a pleasure to break these things down, and I've really been enjoying like layering and giving you more context this year. It's been sort of a point of mine that came up in my reflections during the Kickstarter at the end of
my precious.
Welcome back to Uncharted X. This is Ben, and I hope you're all doing well out there. I'm recording this from sunny Luxor in Upper Egypt. At the moment, I'm right at the end of a really long visit to Egypt. I've been here for several weeks now. Looking forward to getting back home, making some more content, but I've got something a little different for you all today. Not like my regular produced content. This is actually a walkthrough of the incredible Assyrion, the subterranean structure that's found at the back of the Temple of Seti I at Abydos, which is also here in Upper Egypt. I really wanted to do a live stream while I was at the site. If you saw, I put out a community post saying I was going to try and live stream, but unfortunately there really isn't enough cellular bandwidth to be able to do that. I could barely get a single megabit of upload speed out of the phone, so instead I recorded a walkthrough. I really hope you enjoy this. I had a little bit of private time, I guess, in the Assyrion before the rest of the group showed up for our private permission access into the site, have a bit of a chat and some interaction with Yusuf, also Russ and Kyle from the Snake Bros, and then stick around to the end of the video. I've got some interesting new perspectives, I guess, and we got into some spots that gave me some new data, if you like, on the Assyrion, and I'll share those at the end of the walkthrough. I'll also probably drop in and out with a couple of little edits and comments as we go through it. And as always, a massive thank you to all of the channel supporters, patrons, and everybody else who supports my work through that value for value model. I couldn't do this without your help and support, and if you're interested in that, please do check out my website. It's unchartedx.com/support. I hope you enjoy the walkthrough, and I'll catch you in the next one. All right, try this again. Here we are at the Assyrion in Abydos, Upper Egypt. I would have loved to live stream here. I tried. The bandwidth is just too bad. Too poor, not enough to live stream, but I'm going to try and record this. I did this once already, my phone overheated, so I took it out of its case, and we'll see what happens. But yeah, so this is at the back. You find this at the back of the Temple of Seti I, which is this structure up here. You can see it's me. I'll flip the phone over real quick. Hello, here at the Assyrion. And yeah, remarkable structure that was most likely discovered during the time of construction of the temple. And it's an entirely different style and at an entirely different level to the architecture that we find in the Temple of Seti I, who was the ruler of the 19th dynasty. And obviously his son Ramses II and then his son Merenptah have their names throughout the temple, also in parts of this structure actually. Although not Ramses II, funnily enough, the Seti I is named in here, and then Merenptah also at some point got in here and did this. But there are two accesses into the Assyrion. One is all the way around the back. You walk past the remediation wells, although you see these wells here are also part of the system used to pump the water out. There are more wells over this hill, so you walk all the way around, and then you can access this via this long sloping tunnel. You see the roof of it just here. I'm looking at my screen. I'm aiming with my eye and I should be looking through the screen. And this is all made, this may well have been dynastic when it was created. It's full of engravings and hieroglyphs. And it was Flinders Petrie and his associate, his wife and his associate actually, that really first uncovered this and started to excavate. And they excavated it right down to pretty much the end part of it here. And they documented everything that happened. And then they couldn't get any further. In fact, this circular tunnel here that's this like brick construction that you can see, maybe I'll zoom in on it. This stuff here is a relatively modern construction, at least in these days it's 100, 150 years old, but this was done by, I think, Petrie, if not Professor Edward Neville, who was the real guy who actually really excavated this entire structure in and around 1914 was when he finished, but he had been working in years prior to that here in the Assyrion as well. And he talked about it, you know, they didn't know where they were going. They had there was this huge lump of debris and rubble because Petrie, when he was excavating the temple, had dumped everything out on top of this area. So you can imagine all of this was covered in dirt and then sand, and all the rubble and the excavations from the temple were dumped on here. So they had to move all of that out the way as they were getting in under here, and then they had the idea, all right, they need to clear it down from the top and start to get into it, because there were some open chambers and passages. There are some, like the ceiling blocks here, and they kept seeing what they thought were doorways, but it was just really gaps between the columns.
that they got into, and they were crawling in this space, and eventually he removed all of the sand out of here and revealed it. And Neville in his paper called it the Great Pool and the Tomb of Osiris. So it's just monstrous construction. I mean, there's these huge cyclopean granite blocks that make up the structure of the central island and of the Osirion, and also the floor blocks are all granite. And then it's lined in these quartzite blocks, and then behind that is limestone. Fairly roughly worked, you can see the limestone over there. And then there's the quartzite blocks on the walls. And then you have all these granite pillars and blocks and beams that are everywhere else. Obviously a lot of this is now modern reconstruction or modern retaining walls. And in fact, you can see up here this cement wall. There's this huge 10 or 15 meter cement wall that's been sunk down as a retaining wall to stop sort of the hill from coming this way into the Osirion. But quite clearly not part of the temple construction. I think it's highly likely that when this temple was being made, they had to dogleg it to the left in order to avoid the Osirion when they probably discovered it. And even Edward Neville, in his writings about the Osirion, suggested that it might be the oldest building in Egypt altogether, which is kind of hard to imagine, given that if this is the first try at making a building, it's quite spectacular. But he definitely dates it as being, well, it matches the stonework and the masonry that you see in places like the Sphinx Temple or the Valley Temple, although it's much larger. Like the actual granite blocks here are bigger than what you see in those places. And he dates it as being, potentially Old Kingdom, or he even says, even in 1914, that it may well be pre-dynastic. But this entire structure is actually an island. You can see here this granite. There's water that runs all around the edge of it. The ceiling spans the gap, but it's actually built on top of an island. The whole thing is built on top of a very specific small aquifer, or a natural spring that comes from somewhere, and it pushes up water into here. And it's not Nile water that comes in here, although it may well be connected to the Nile, and we can talk about that too. Strabo is another guy who talked about this particular space, or we think he was talking about this space, and he describes it as having a canal that also connected it to the Nile. So I've removed the magical rope barrier here, and you can see the water level's a lot lower than it has been in the past. They've been actively pumping the water out here. They've been doing a lot of work removing all the big blocks that used to be in these channels, and they've shifted them out the back. So they're cleaning this up, and I've been talking with the guy who is responsible for all the excavation work happening here now, and they say they have plans to remove all of the mud. So you can see the sediment level, but they want to pump all of that out, and obviously you can see the granite blocks that are still stuck in the channels everywhere. These are all remnants from quarrying and later activities. But even when Neville was here, he was here during a particularly dry year, so the water table level had dropped. And when they excavated down, they got down about 4 meters below the level of the platform, and you could see, you could see it down. There's actually old photographs from that period and that excavation, and he estimated that it might have been another 4 meters beyond that, so 8 meters. But we know now from more modern explorations that it's actually much deeper than that. 5 or 6 stories, 30 meters plus. We don't really know, because every time people have tried to probe the bottom and get through the muck and find out where does this go, you end up hitting water pressure that's being pushed up from this aquifer, and it really messes with these stick readings. And there's all these different readings for how deep the water actually goes here. We're not quite sure.
Future Ben here. After I recorded this walkthrough, I was chatting with the lead archaeologist who's been doing all of the work in the Osirion and pulling out all of the blocks and doing some more recent excavations, and I asked him about the depth of the Osirion, and he told me 21 meters was the depth. So in lieu of any other past experiments or all the other reports that I've seen, I'm just going to go with his figure for 21 meters, which is really quite a remarkable depth when you consider that entire island is constructed of granite blocks. And hopefully when they do remove all of the mud and the water, we'll actually be able to get down there and see all of these constructed blocks and maybe find out if there are chambers or if there's anything else below the surface.
So hopefully in the future, in the not too distant future, they'll clear this out and we'll actually get to the bottom of this. But this is constructed, so the entire island, you're standing on top of a huge megalithic construction here. Like, these are all blocks, and in the pictures we have, and from what we know, there are constructed blocks that go down much, much further. And if it's anything like the construction work on top, I mean, these are cyclopean, massive granite blocks that have likely come from Aswan. You know, there's quartzite on the walls here has probably come from the Cairo region, the Red Mountain to the north of Cairo. So this stuff's come in from a long way away. And it's just immense. I mean, it's just, it's hard to say until you're actually in here. Of course, it's been quarried. So you see a lot of the damage. You see the typical kind of wedge and chisel quarrying marks, say, on the top of this block here. We zoom in, you can see it up there. You can see more of them just here on this block. Over here, they tried to take a face off of this stone, and it didn't split evenly. It just took the chunk off it, off the top. And Neville thinks that the excavation work was probably not particularly ancient. It might have even been the Coptic, so after the Romans and the Persians even. So it might have been Coptic Christian era quarrying, so the site might have been uncovered even as recently as then, and was potentially even whole, and it was used as a quarry, a convenient granite quarry for stones down here. There's a lot of detail in this site. Obviously, it was occupied, and other times, I mean, this is a good spot to zoom in on this as well. The Flower of Life. Hopefully, you can see it. It's very bright, and I can barely see my phone screen. I was trying to live stream this chat, but the bandwidth is just like less than a megabit of upload, which just wouldn't make anyone very happy because it'd be very pixelated. But you have these flowers of life that are in here. Of course, it's quite famous for the flowers of life, although I think there's something of a distraction from the actual achievement that they're etched onto or that they're painted onto. Kind of looks like paint to me. There's also a depiction of a boat that maybe a Greek boat or something that's in here. So other people have clearly been down here, as I think the dynastic Egyptians were, because you have Seti I and Meren Ptah, who wrote their names all over it. Well, they wrote their names in that passageway that we'll go take a look at. They also wrote their name on some glyphs at the back of the Assyrion, but the vast majority of it is completely unadorned with no glyphs whatsoever. And in that, it matches much of the, you know, the so-called Old Kingdom architecture, things like the Valley Temple, the Sphinx Temple, where there's just no glyphs anywhere. It's just simple, massive, and speaks on its own. You can see the quarry of these things. So not all of these pillars are single block. You have multiple blocks here. This one around the corner here is multiple blocks. But most of them are these massive single pillars. You can see how they're kind of keyed in as well. Like they had either keystones or they were notched in to fit. You can see another gap where there might have been another keystone here. But since the water's been pumped out of here, there's a tremendous amount of detail that's being revealed with the lower water levels. It's certainly lower than I've ever seen it in the past. And one of the really cool things about it is, I'll talk about what this is in a minute, but one of the really cool things here is the tube drill that goes off into the granite masonry here. So you have basically a tubular drill that's worn, that runs off this way, and then there's always been a bit of mystery about where this goes, but again, speaking with the people doing the excavation here, they say they figured this out. And they say it actually goes out to about here, and then it doglegs and turns down and goes down at an angle, and it pops out over in the channel over there.
Future Ben here again. I just want to talk a little bit more about this tube drill, because again, and there is something of a language barrier when it comes to speaking with the Egyptian team doing the work here. I kind of clarified what he had told me previously about that tube drill. I'd actually learned that information last year when I was at the site, and this footage you can see right now is been kindly provided by Carolee, one of the people on this tour, who had a good look inside the hole. You can see it either stops at the end, or it's blocked, or maybe it does turn the corner. But the archaeologist told me that they weren't actually quite sure where it came out. That was kind of a guess where it might have came out, down lower on those, I guess, in the canals around the central island. And he also thinks that there are probably other tube drill inlets, or there are probably other tube drills down there. But again, it's just kind of his postulation and his idea. They don't actually know for sure.
Hello. Janet. There's the man. There they all are. Welcome to the Assyrian. What's up, bro? There's definitely not enough bandwidth for streaming. I'm just recording. Yeah. But I'm going to upload it as a live stream. Yeah, man. There's my buddy Tito. There he is. Tito. So yeah, I got a little bit of a head start on the group and got in here. Wanted to chat to YouTube about it. But so this inset is actually really interesting because it's, I don't know if you can see, but it's inset slightly. Like it's like this inset that runs around the edge of this. I'll even zoom out a bit more. Runs around the edge of this whole pillar base, and you'll find the same thing on these other pillars. So if we look at the base of this pillar, you see it's inset, right? It's inset in, so I think this was likely a pillar base. And you probably had the pillar resting maybe on the edges of this granite block, these granite blocks, and then there's a space beneath it. Like this is stone floor. I don't know if it was sunk all the way in, if it was actually keyed in here, or if it was just sitting on this edge. And you had a space here, but you also have this tube drill that's somehow, it's got to be there for a reason, right? You have to have planned this as part of the masonry and you're building it, kind of like the shafts in the pyramid, to do something, maybe push water, or I don't know, but you can see the old water lines and level where the water used to be. And you could just see it. You couldn't get in here because it was mud and wet, but they cleared it out. And yeah, it's a real mystery as to what that is. And are there tube drills behind or beneath these other pillars? We just don't know.
Future Ben here again. After I finished the walkthrough, we did kind of get a little bit closer to the bottom of this question about whether or not these pillars are keyed directly into those sockets. And I mean, just from a logical perspective, I think they were, because if you consider these pillars were likely supporting the huge ceiling that we see in the Assyrian, I mean, that's a lot of weight sitting on these granite pillars, and you'd think that they would need to be keyed in all the way down in those sockets to support just that massive weight that's sitting on top of them. But if you look closely at this image where I've frozen it, take a look at this hole. This is like a new little hole that's been dug. I didn't see this even a month ago when I was here. And it seems to like somebody's just dug in beneath one of the pillars there, and it's got a bunch of dirt in there or whatever, and we stuck our hand in and kind of cleared it out as best we could. You do run into stone, so if that's a socket beneath that pillar, then the pillar seems to extend down into it. Now, I couldn't really tell if there was a gap between the socket and the pillar itself, but if it is socketed into that space, it really begs the question, then what is that tube drill for in the socket? Even Edward Neville speculated in 1914 that he thinks it might be some sort of hydraulic installation, the whole site. He doesn't think it's ceremonial or anything like that. He actually speculated it might have been functional. And again, talking with the lead archaeologist about that tube drill, he thinks that it was also functional. He thinks it might have had something potentially to do with compressing water or somehow maintaining the water level in the overall Assyrian. We really don't know, and it's kind of an open question as to whether or not, you know, there are more of these tube drills beneath the pillars, or if this is just a single occurrence that happens at one of the central pillar sockets on the island.
You can see this here is actually a larger space, a much larger space. Potentially it was also the base for another pillar, but one thing we observed the last trip here is actually what might be the largest block that's in here. And it's actually this one. So if you look at the dimensions of this granite block, right, it runs up to here, it doglegs around this corner, comes here, runs all the way down here, and then this, we don't know how deep it is because the water's there, but it actually includes this whole cutout section here for this piece. It runs over here. We're still on the same block. It runs all the way to here. And then dog legs back around underneath this pillar. This looks like, to me, this might be potentially a modern repair under there, I don't really know. And then up here and under here. So if I back up and look at it, it's huge, just huge. This one piece here, like all the way there, back around here. Massive. Of course, the deepest parts in this are also, that we know of at least, are in the end pools. And again, you can see some of the steps that go down, but you know, it goes down a long way. There's a rod there shoved into it, but I mean, this water's pretty gnarly. I've heard about people drinking it and their eyesight improved and whatever, but I'm not, my eyesight's fine and I don't want to take the risk. So on the back wall here, and this is quartzite, you can see it is inscribed. So, but you can see also, if you look closely, it's hammered in. Like this is, you can see the headdress there. I mean, this is obviously the works of hammer and chisel work. It's fairly rough relative to the hard surface. You also have some inscriptions on the top level of granite here. Right, so it's not like it's entirely unadorned.
Structure was still intact.
Yeah. I mean, look at this beautiful straight lines on this, the bottom of these. Look at that. Oh God. That could be better. Someone can draw a straight line. And it does definitely seem like at least Seti the First got in here and left his mark. And then strangely, Ramses never came in here. And what we think might have happened is Seti might have actually sealed this up. And then Ramses never got in here. But then Meren Ptah, who, you know, some say he was trying to be close to Osiris all the time, and given this was considered the tomb of Osiris or a sanctuary of Osiris or the tomb of Osiris's head or something, then he might have got in here and added his name, because in these passages back here, if you look right back in there, you can see those inscriptions, and we'll go and look at all of that wall as well. And in the meantime, we'll film the rest of the group coming down. I think they're walking around. Are they walking around? Are they walking around? The other group's walking around? All right, cool. We'll go and meet them in a minute. But yeah, it's just, I mean, I don't know what to tell you about this other than it's super impressive. And then of course you have this area, which is the finished ceiling block. Like you still have the finished massive granite ceiling that's on here. These huge spans of granite that cross over. There were even bigger beams in here at one point, and I'll show you those in a minute. And of course, in some of these little alcoves and in these little indentations and on top of some of the blocks, there are keystones, and they found keystones, and some of those keystones have had like the cartouche of Seti the First on them, like these locking keystones that sit on top of some of the blocks. And I've heard people say, well, that's proof that he built it, but I don't think it's any more proof that he built it any more than the hieroglyphs are proof that he built it. The hieroglyphs could have been added later, the keystones could have been added later, the glyphs on the keystones could have been added later. It doesn't match anything else that's around here, and certainly not the architecture that was being used by guys like Seti the First and the 19th dynasty, as powerful as they were. The other great feature that you see in here is this unfinished smoothing of the wall. All right, so they were smoothing from the top down, almost like they had some sort of paint roller or something. And you know, they slowly put down their tools at some point for some reason and stop smoothing. You also see plenty of nubs. Oh, that's a cool spot. How'd you get up there? When did you get up there? That's cool. That's a cool perspective. Oh, there's Russ. Also, these nubs, you see tons of other little details in these stones, the little inset keystones. So maybe there was damage to a stone or somebody knocked a corner off, but you find that, I mean, everything's notched in. And, even here, like, stuff is notched in. So it's not like simple just layers of masonry. They went to extreme effort to, like, make this a tightly fit, precision megalithic wall. And I know somewhere around here there are insets with just the tiniest little piece that's been added. And maybe it's because somebody chipped a corner off or something happened, but this also shows you that these blocks were transported here unfinished, and then they were finished in place, right? So we see this commonly with other architecture. Stuff was shipped with, like the Menkaure pyramid, the third pyramid, it was fitted with this, this puffy layer of stone that was then removed. It's potentially a protective layer of stone for transport, and then it was removed. Also, you can see all of the alcoves, cells, alcoves, whatever you want to call them, about 6 feet wide or 7 feet wide and tall. Insets, they have tube drills in the holes there. that are in the tops, so they had doors. And these is kind of matching on this side, and then on the other side where you've had a lot more destruction, you also have these little alcoves or cells in place. There's also a very impressive stone here, this lentil, this quartzite lentil that sits above the back door. This is a huge block of very fine quality quartzite. And again, the lower water level is revealing a lot of details. You can see the lines from where the water level was, but we see these large nubs on these granite blocks that make up the floor. And then of course, the stairs that seem to lead down into the pool. And again, without these bridges here, you can notice that it's actually it's an island. Like you're literally looking at, even zoom out a bit further, this whole thing's an island built on top of an aquifer that's 5 or 6 stories tall, made from granite. And we have no idea if there are chambers in it or anything like that. We just don't know. And, I really am hopeful that they get to a point where they're getting all of this sediment out of here and this mud and pumping it out with a muck pump or something. It's another nice nub on the stone here. So yeah, let me have a look. Let's see. So we go up here, and this is where they've been storing all of the bits and pieces of granite that they've found from various spots. And you can see the shape of the roof beam. Did you get up there? That's cool. Did you see something?
Yeah, I was wanting to look at the tops of the ceiling, and apparently they found a black
Keystone.
keystone. Yeah.
Yeah, with Seti the First's
Yeah, so it's
inscription
not
on it.
in there, but there are some black keystones.
I've seen a picture. The guy has a picture of it. The main archaeologist has a picture of it. Yeah.
But yeah, the ceiling blocks from in person.
Massive.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, it is cool.
And you can see the thickness of the wall all the way. Like you've got the hard sandstone or quartzite, and then it goes back 6 meters.
Yeah, wasn't it 20 feet was the thickness
Yeah.
of the walls? That's what,
Yeah.
what is it, Professor Edward Neville
yes.
said? Yeah.
Yeah.
And this stuff used to be, I can tell you from previous visits, I probably got footage of it, but this all used to be just all over here, and there was reeds and shit in here.
They've been doing a lot of work.
And they really cleaned it up, and they're working on it. And you can see actually even the floors constructed in here pretty well. What is this, limestone it almost looks like? I'm not sure. These are all quarried bits of granite that came out of the passages and tunnels. Oh yeah, look at that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just cool. So these are the span blocks, right? These arch blocks, and then there would have been another span on top
Yes.
of granite.
So this would have been a chamber just like the one on the other side,
Yeah.
which is intact.
Yeah, this is like the other chamber with
Yeah.
the triangular ceiling,
Yeah,
right?
It would have had a vaulted ceiling.
Yeah. There's this just monstrous block of quartzite here as well. That's the lentil. I like the colors in this thing. It's like
Yeah, Neville said that was a 12-foot block.
12-foot block. All right. Yeah. And then this side is obviously stacked up a bunch more stuff. There they are. This is up Petrie's constructed tunnel. There's Carl. And there's all of the inscriptions in the passage. We'll go in there and have a look a bit later. Illegal. Yeah, I know. All right, I'll try and do this without banging the phone. Yeah. I got it, thanks.
Goes all the way to where I am.
Yeah, so we're standing on a massive block here. So this block here, with the key dent, runs all the way to here. And this is a big granite block right here. You can see the coloring. Pink granite. Oh yeah. Hey man. How are you? Good, how you doing? Well, this is a giant, as we point out, this is a massive granite block here that I'm standing on, right? Russ just showed it to me. But it starts here. So I'm standing on the tip of it, and it runs all the way. Yeah, it's one of the ceiling pieces, and it has a notch. It was probably notched in. Yeah, a keystone or something was in here.
Somebody was making a huge
Yeah.
millstone right here.
Column base, maybe?
And this was about as far as Petrie got too. Like this is all. This is an ancient modern, a modern ancient construction. This brickwork was done 100 and 150 years ago for this tunnel. So Petrie and his wife and his assistant, Marie, yeah, I forget her name, but his wife was a geologist as well. But they excavated that tunnel you guys just came through, and they documented the glyphs and everything. And then it was Edward Neville that finally, he sort of stopped here, and then Edward Neville finally got into here and started to see what the hell is this. And he sort of saw this one, this giant quartzite block first. And they realized they're onto something big here, and this doorway, and this is all filled with sand, and Petrie had piled up all of the rubble from the temple excavation on top of this area. So you got to imagine it's all filled up with sand, and then there's piles and piles of rubble and sand that came from the temple excavation. So they had to remove all of that first before they even start to come down and dig down. It took him years. He came back in a couple different periods, but at one point they were working here for, it was like I think it was like 7 or 8 months with 600 people. They had railway carts, they had 2 railway lines where they're filling up, just filling up these carts, and they're carting it off with, with baskets as well. And then, of course, they get down into this area, and it's just pure sand, and it just keeps on falling in, and they're trying to excavate it out. But he eventually cleared it out and found it. Like, at that point, it was a dry period in Egypt with the water table was quite low. So he measured about 4 meters down to where the water was. So it's much higher now, although it's lower than it's been in a long time. About 4 meters down from where the water was, that's where the water level was. And then he estimated another 4 meters below that of constructed masonry. But it's actually much deeper than that. We know this from more modern experiments of people trying to plumb the bottom, right? It's like 5 or 6 stories, 30 meters, that form this central island, because it is effectively an island. Like it's an island built on top of an aquifer, and it's all granite construction. You're standing on top of something that's 5 or 6 stories tall, made from granite, that's sitting on top of an aquifer that's pushing this water up. And we don't know if there are chambers or anything below it, but I understand they have plans to actually start pumping the muck and the mud up out of here. And so maybe we'll get to the bottom of it eventually. Like we'll actually figure out how big is this and are there chambers in it and what is it? Because it's, the whole thing in the center is granite, and then you're surrounded by quartzite and limestone and sandstone around here. Like this is quartzite. It's probably from the Red Mountain, I think.
Probably,
Yeah.
So when you say they...
Red Mountains are...
Cairo. Yeah, it's north of Cairo, yeah? Yeah, a long way away.
So when you say they rail cart rubble out of here,
Well, on top, you got to imagine that this is all filled with sand. They had little railway lines with carts, but they would pull the cart up.
took it how far away?
Yeah, a little bit out in the desert, dump it out, and then these guys would pull it manually. But it was better than using baskets.
Yeah, what is the chance that they took the rubble from somewhere and covered up another thing somewhere?
Probably pretty good.
It's not zero,
Pretty good.
You know.
That's like almost 100% for sure. They dumped it into something. Look here, we can see also here like 3 different structures, 4 if we added the modern one with the terraces and this. And then we have the blocks of sandstone here. And
Yeah.
then we have the blocks of limestone here, which is also built by the new kingdom. So this was probably the doing of Seti the First, and this was the doing of Merim Petah. Seem like what we find here, perhaps, I'm not positive 100%. But for sure, this limestone one came on the ones from Quartzite, and as we can see also the attempt of adding the inscription on the megalithic site. This is another conclusive evidence that the inscriptions can be added by those who inherited the site, and we by mistake used these inscriptions to date and relate and also understand the function of the site based on translating these, because this is the Book of the Gates, this is the symbolic tomb of Osiris. Let's go inside and take a look at the so-called symbolic tomb of Osiris.
Symbolic tomb of Osiris. Yeah.
The foundation itself is built from massive multi-ton blocks. Here's the plan. This is the last that we know, and the Aswan
See more scoop marks under here.
On the very template, the cortisite. So the older construction is built mainly from the cortisite.
You can still see these blocks are still inset. Let's see if we can do this. Don't die. Don't fall in the mud. See, yeah, these little alcoves. No, I mean, these look like they're ground out too. They don't look particularly like tube drilled or anything. But that could have also been functional for a long time. The ceiling's coming in, but this is your typical little alcove that's in here. And there you can see some of the size of the ceiling blocks, which are just monstrous.
Future Ben here again. I just wanted to point out something that actually Kyle showed me while we were looking around this side of the Assyrian, and that is, take a look here at all of the second level blocks in between the alcoves. All of them along the line here, they're all a single piece. Sometimes the bottom level you'll have a couple of blocks in there, but all of the second level blocks are a single piece. They have complex geometries. They curve in and around the doorway and then into the alcove and onto the back wall. So these are all very complex, carved, large single blocks of quartzite. Also, please don't mind my voice in this. I've been losing my voice. I typically lose my voice a little bit on these tours. I'm not used to talking so much or so loudly while I'm on these trips, and you can really hear it in my voice.
All right, I'll show you guys the thing at the end here. We're going on the ledge. See if we can find some interesting stonework bits. So then we'll join, see what Yusuf's got to say a little bit. Then I'm going to do some explaining for the group. Talk about a few things. Spotted. I see you. Obviously the birds like it here. I mean, a lot of this is obviously bird shit. There's just a lot of bird crap in here. Plus there's bats. There are bats in the back chamber. And I just love the reflection of the water.
There's part of the roof that's still standing over here. You want to see it? Look at the massive pieces that form. You see them?
You can see it's almost not finished along here too, like. Yeah.
And then you put a roof on top of the roof.
Yeah, there's layers. See the quarried blocks up there. It's just like
Some of them don't look like edges. They remind me so much of the Newton blocks on top of the structure of Orlando. Yeah. This could be a patch, but this rectangular one that is not attached to another block of stone, or these ones were built standing. Yeah. And we can see the interlocking method. Look at this block.
yeah, Yusuf calls it an interlocking method, and he's right. Like in terms of how the blocks like dig around the corners and dip, and nothing's flat. All right, we'll take a quick look in the back chamber, and then I'm probably going to wrap this up so I can spend some time with my group, and we'll talk a bunch about it. Take a quick look in the chamber and then I'll wrap this up. Yeah, we'll take a quick look at the flower of life here, what Yusuf has to say.
These are really powerful, and they are viral everywhere on the internet about the same like the helicopter or submarine and all this stuff like that. And they said rumors like it's actually etched with laser into the stone. This is what it's called.
It's painted. Yeah.
And but like, why would they spread this kind of misinformation? In my opinion, is to just to take our focus on the symbolism or the flower of life, and not noticing that we are something in the middle of a megalithic structure that originally had no inscriptions, and we know that these inscriptions came later. It's very important what this site offers. It shows the truth.
Shows the truth, indeed.
It's on a lower level than the temple.
All right, so the back chamber, which is almost the same as the front chamber, and I'm really pleased to say that they've cleaned this up because they've added this nice, looks like decomposed granite floor that's in here, because it used to just stink in here. It was full of bats and bat guano, but it's a big old A-frame ceiling in here. This, you guys, this used to be like, smell really bad in here. It used to be a lot of bat guano. It was a very strong smell. They added this floor in here. It's just awesome. Much nicer. No, it smells good. I like it. Whatever it is, it smells better than it used to, trust me.
It doesn't smell bad at all.
Yeah. Yeah, and then there's, you can see the writing on the, it's all inscribed up in here on the ceiling. Huge newt. This is like Newt's foot, and then Newt, her body runs all the way up to here, and there's her head. So Newt's like the cosmic ocean, the primordial ocean. She represents the stars at night. You can see, yeah, like a primordial goddess.
She's being supported by
All right, guys. Well, I hope you enjoyed this. Well, hope you enjoyed this look into this Sirion. I'm going to do some more content on this. I'm going to do a proper video and some research stuff and make a longer produced video with all of the footage that I've collected from around the years. But I really wanted to live stream this today. Just couldn't manage it with the bandwidth, unfortunately. But yeah, I've got some plans on content with this thing. So you guys take it easy. Catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.
The last aspect of the Assyrion that I wanted to mention in this video has to do with the top of the structure, and I had the chance to get up on top of it, kind of on top of the sloping tunnel, and then around to the northern side of the Assyrion, which is kind of see it from up on top in the viewing area, but it was a rare chance to get up there and actually take a look at it. And this is where they've been doing some recent excavations, and they've uncovered some of the keystone blocks that actually lock in all these bow tie joins that sit between the granite blocks. And there are still a couple of keystone blocks in them. These are made from black granite. You find these types of bow tie joins or keystone blocks in a lot of different structures. We can find them in places like Karnak, at Komombo, and also on Luxor Temple. In fact, on some of the large statues out the front of Luxor Temple, there are large holes where there were probably at some point either stone or wooden keystone blocks, I suspect probably stone. In fact, on the back of one of the statues at Luxor, out the front, you can find keystone blocks still put in place. They're kind of almost undersized. They're like the wrong fit, which makes me think that it's possible that these were a later repair. I say this because at the Assyrion, one of the keystone blocks that they found was inscribed with the cartouche of Seti I. And I was shown a photo of this by the archaeologist who's been leading the excavations on the site, and he kind of said, well, this must be proof that Seti I built the Assyrion. I don't think this proves it any more than the hieroglyphs prove it. And if you saw that short clip that was in the video, it showed you that, the hieroglyphs are lacking straight lines and all that type of thing, whereas the blocks in the Assyrion seem to have no problem with straight lines. It's clearly a different technology and a different tool set being used by the stone carvers making the inscriptions versus those who were making the blocks themselves. And it's the same thing for the rough cartouche that was on the black granite keystone. It could have been added later. The keystone itself could have been added later as a repair. And this is also reinforced by the fact that behind the Assyrian, and in fact on top of these granite blocks, were roughly cut limestone blocks. And you can see here all of these limestone blocks. We know that the dynastic Egyptians, particularly those in the 19th dynasty, were working on the Assyrian. Like they put their name in it. They were, Seti I probably bricked it up and restricted access to it, and they may well have built a lot of this limestone infrastructure over the top of it and surrounding it. And they could well have accessed these keystone blocks and either inscribed them or even put these keystone blocks into place, because as we've seen from other examples, they're not exactly super tight fitting. And we know that whoever built the Assyrian could make little inset blocks that are incredibly well fitting. We see many examples of this in the quartzite walls that make up the Assyrian itself. And in fact, there are a couple of places where there are little inset blocks that just fit perfectly. What we see in the keystone blocks really doesn't match that. While it's interesting, I think it really only shows us that, yes, the dynastic Egyptians were working on it. I'm not sure it really proves anything beyond that. So in any case, I hope you enjoyed this walkthrough of the Assyrian. Like I said, I do plan to make a more produced research video discussing various aspects of it, and I'm very hopeful that this project that I've heard about to actually remove the muck and the mud from the canals and trenches around that central structure moves forward. I greatly look forward to seeing any results from it, and indeed visiting the site in the future on tours to come, which will be a great time. We always make sure that we include the Assyrian as one of the special permissions. I think it's a really important site, and it's a real treat to get down in here and look at all of these different aspects of it up close and in person. So I hope you enjoyed that walkthrough of the Assyrian, and I will see you all in the next video. Cheers.
Last October of 2023, and yep, I can't believe it's 2024 already either, but last October a research paper was published in a peer-reviewed journal, Archaeological Prospection, titled Geoarchaeological Prospecting of Gudang Padang Buried Prehistoric Pyramid in West Java, Indonesia. Authored by indigenous Indonesian geologist Danny Hillman Nadawajaja et al., or with others, it describes the work conducted on the little-known site in the jungle of Indonesia from October 2011 until October 2014, a decade ago now, which should give you an idea on just how slowly the wheels of the peer review process can grind at times. The findings reported in this paper are frankly extraordinary, as Hillman and his team conclude that based on their integrated, multi-method approach that included trenching, core drilling, carbon dating, ground-penetrating radar, electrical resistivity tomography, and seismic tomography, the structure at Gudang Padang is a man-made pyramid, likely with internal chambers, built over multiple periods of occupation and construction, its oldest layers going back an astonishing 27,000 years, to a time tens of thousands of years before any known ancient civilization. You'd think that a paper like this, detailing years of solid scientific work, should have resonated through the archaeological establishment like an earth-shattering kaboom, similar to the findings at Göbekli Tepe, but that's certainly not what happened.
Where's the kaboom? There was supposed to be an earth-shattering kaboom.
Instead, and perhaps unsurprisingly to some, it was met with a majority of silence, or if not that, then criticism and derision.
You can almost hear the snorts of derision.
So let's get into the details here. What exactly was found at Gudang Padang by Danny Hillman with his years of work on the site? Should this paper and this remote, rarely seen site in the jungles of Indonesia be considered another piece of evidence for a seismic shift in our understanding of human civilizations on this planet? Or is there validity to the backlash and criticism that has formed the primary response from archaeologists? My name is Ben, and this is Uncharted X. In this video, we're going to dive into the details and history of the enigmatic ancient site of Gunung Padang and get into the controversy surrounding Hillman's paper and the response to it from the archaeological establishment. Before we get started, a quick update on upcoming events, and this is chapterized if you want to skip ahead. There are still a few spots available on my very shortly upcoming special permission Egypt tours in both February and March of this year. If you want to check out the amazing sites of Upper and Lower Egypt with special permission access into a bunch of places and a 4-night Nile cruise, all of the details are on my website, unchartedx.com. I'll also be speaking at the Eclipse at the Canyon event this April in Texas. 3 nights of camping, the full totality of the solar eclipse, live music from the likes of $50 Dynasty, other great speakers, and even some stand-up comedy. It's going to be a good time, and if you're interested, check out the link below in the description. Also, I'm happy to say that I'll be returning to the Cosmic Summit Conference in 2024, June 15th and 16th at the Sheraton in Greensboro, North Carolina. The speaker lineup has expanded this year, and it promises to be an
We're
excellent
gonna read
event.
somebody, maybe.
Check out the link below in the description for all of the details and tickets. Lastly, in channel news, I'm doing weekly live streams over on Rumble, usually on Fridays or Saturdays if you want to catch me live. And
No,
I've
we're
also
not
set
gonna
up
read
a
anybody.
locals page for those who want to support my channel through the
Where's
value
this
value
sign
model.
off?
And again, all of the links to those
Thanks
are
for being
below
here.
in the video description.
You rule.
The site of